Welcome back F11 members to the Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorials for issue 55, August 2016. So in part 1 we worked on a Tuscan scene using both Lightroom and Photoshop. Now let's go to the hills above Cernabus, where I was shooting just last week. In fact, you can see the video on the location finding behind this shoot, how this picture came about. So let's finish the whole process with the post-production of the shot. And in part 1, I worked in both Photoshop and Lightroom to do the post-production on a picture. This time we're going to achieve the same sort of thing using just Lightroom. And before you see the scene, the image on the left, the raw straight out of the camera, the image on the right, the finished product. Okay, so let's work through it. So if I just go to back to my normal library, one shot screen mode, and I'm in the develop module and I'm going to reset. So we're starting from scratch, and there is the picture straight out of the camera. Now I think you'll remember in part 1 I looked at, one of the first things I did was looked at the lens corrections to make sure that I had even coverage across the entire frame. As I've said many times before, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. In this particular case, I think I do want even coverage. So if I go to Profile here and go Enable Profile Corrections, you'll see there Lens Profile and it says None. Now for some reason, Lightroom doesn't recognize the lens I used for this picture, which is the Canon 24mm TSE tilt and shift lens. It doesn't have a profile for that lens, unsurprisingly quite a specialist lens. So what I do in that particular case, if I now go to Manual and I come down here to the vignetting, and I'm just going to manually add a bit of vignetting correction, round about 10 to 20. If I go too far, it brightens the outer edge of the image too much. It's just going to be very subtle, round about there, just to make sure that the edges of the frame are not significantly darker than the center of the frame is. And that's done. The other thing I'm going to get done while I'm here is the sharpening. So if I come over here to the left and, as usual, select the sharpen preset, adjust my masking so that the sky is the opposite. So the landscape only is being affected by the sharpening tool. Hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, move across the masking slider till the black is affecting the sky and not much else. It's always around about 10 on the masking control, somewhere around there. So that's fine. And now I can get on with the more creative adjustments. Now let's look at this. I've got some quite contrasty light here, and this path leading through the barley fields there. The depths of the shadows indicate to me there's no detail there. And in fact, if I click on this here now, up on the top of my histogram there, I can see I'm clipping just a few shadows. I wanted to make this picture essentially using just one frame without resorting to exposure, merging, and I've worked to ensure I'm still retaining detail up here in the sky, but at the same time I've lost just a few shadows down there. I'm not particularly concerned about that. And now if I just boost my shadow detail here until I start to see about as much detail as I want to. Now there is beauty in a dark, rich, dense black. So I just want to see a little bit of detail down there, not too much. So I'm going to boost my shadows to about 60 there, and that's given me about as much detail as I want. Great, let's move on now. So that's the shadows. I'm going just to add a touch of vibrance to the image. To that barley, by the way, the exposure I used here, I've used a polarizing filter, and I used a 0.9 ND filter to slow the exposure to get there was a breeze blowing, so I wanted just a bit of movement on the barley, not too much, so that it just went all milky. If I go back into library mode, actually, we can see there 0.8 of a second exposure, almost a second exposure. So that was enough to give me a bit of movement, but still see the form of those lovely heads of the barley there. When you watch barley ripple in the breeze, it really is quite a beautiful thing. So now, looking at that picture, I'm pretty pleased with how the field of barley looks, but the landscape beyond, that beautiful rolling Dorset landscape, there's a bit of haze in there, and of course the sky is looking washed out and burnt out, but there is detail there. And what I'm going to do is use the grad tool here to actually try and make some adjustments to that area of the picture. So if I now just pull the grad down, so it's a fairly hard grad here, and I can just move it down so it's adjusting that kind of area of the image. Now what I'm going to do is use the Dehaze slider in the grad tool. Now I find this a really useful thing to do, because if you use the Dehaze tool globally over the whole of the image, it does tend to affect your foreground adversely, making it look all a bit too treacly. So I want to just use the Dehaze slider in tandem with the grad tool, so that it's only affecting the landscape in the distance, and that's where the haze is most apparent. So I'm going to use the Dehaze slider here and dial in round about plus 35, I reckon, of dehazer, and it's done a really good job of adding definition to that landscape. Really quite amazing, isn't it? And also to the sky as well. Now the negative is that it's actually filled in some of those shadows on the hedge just on the edge of the field. Not a big deal, but nevertheless, this is the sort of attention to detail that can make or break a picture. So I'm going to modify the area that the grad tool is affecting by going up here to click on brush now and come down here to erase. And now if I come over here and click on show selected mask overlay, now that red is showing me where the grad tool is affecting, and I can now fine-tune that mask, fine-tune the area of the selection using the brush here. And I've selected erase, and I use my square brackets key on the keyboard to adjust the size of my brush. And now I can just, if I just come down here and put flow down to about 60%, I can just paint away the mask there. And I'm gradually painting away the red mask where it's affecting just the hedge there. And actually, if I click the mask overlay off, I can see visually what I'm doing. And that's just bring in some of that detail in the hedge there. I'm going to do the same with these trees here, right on the skyline. Just give myself a bit of smaller brush there and paint in there on those trees. It just brings up some of the shadow detail in that area there. This is real sort of fine-tuning of the picture, but this is the sort of thing that is important. We're always going for the optimum quality, the best we can possibly do, aren't we? Okay, that's worked really well. so I can click on Done Now. Now, looking at that picture, I'm virtually done, but there's just a few fine-tune adjustments I'd like to make, and I'm going to use the adjustment brush to do that. Up here, top right, click on that, and again, I adjust the size of my brush using the square brackets, and I'm going to click on Show Selected Mask Overlay, and I'm just going to paint into the area that I want to affect, that I want to make an adjustment to. What I'm going to do is just add a touch of contrast to this area of the barley field. It's a feathered selection, as you can see here from my brush controls here. There's a 100 feather selection, giving this a soft edge to the area I've selected. So I come over here, click off the mask overlay, and now I'm just going to dial in a touch of contrast, and it's only affecting that area that I've selected. And I think that just, come back on that a touch actually, just want to dial in round about 35%, I'd say, to give a bit of contrast there. Done. And now I'm not quite finished. I'm going to use the adjustment brush again and just select this area here, show my mask overlay. Just select this area okay, click off the mask overlay, and in this particular area I just want to brighten it just a touch. Come back on that, and that's it. Okay, so there you go. Now the image is done and ready for export. If I look at where I started and where I finished, fair bit of improvement there, as you can see. Brought out some of the shadow detail, dealt with the haze in the distance, optimized the impact and the drama of the sky there, and just fine-tuned a little bit the contrast and the brightness in some areas of the barley field. So I hope that's been of use. Please do send us your suggestions for what you'd like to see in future fundamentals of post-production video tutorials. And of course, we want to see your pictures in the members gallery and hear the stories behind how they came to be. Thank you, and I'll be back next issue, September 2016.